Hello, everyone, and welcome to this information session on animal research and education ethics. And the session today has a particular focus on the research element. Tomorrow's session will focus on the education side. So my name is Sean Lacey. I'm the university's Research Integrity and Compliance Officer. And what my plan here for this is just to kind of try to give maybe probably 15-20 minute presentation, just to kind of set the scene on how animal research and education ethics will be overseen for the next academic year. So from the 1st of September onwards, just to kind of give people maybe time to kind of digest it before going on their own respective leaves and so on like that. So just I'm going to mention a couple of points. I suppose a lot of the text that you'll see here, so maybe that's the first thing I'll say. I will front load it to say, look, that the slides are quite texty. And that's because I would feel like we're going to share the slides afterwards, and they are a point of information, and as opposed to maybe kind of going with the UDL approach and using images and stuff. We felt it was important that you have the text there to be actually able to read and use it as a point of information after today's session as well. So I won't be reading out all the text, but I'll obviously mention the certain points, parts to it, but just maybe to kind of give you a heads up on that one. So we have an animal research and education ethics policy. I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes, but it states that all research and educational activity that involves animals as subjects is required to undergo a formal ethical review prior to the commencement of the study. Okay, and the word study is quite broad, and there's a definition of it in the various documents, which I'll mention a bit later on. But the study basically covers any interaction with an animal, whether it is for a research study, as in research purposes, or for educational purposes or anything like that. Okay. There's a couple of examples then that we'd use for where animals could be used for research or educational purposes. This could be medical research. Again, I won't read out all these, but I'll put them up in the slides. Where you could be using animals for drug testing and vaccine development, behavioral studies, genetic research, demonstration or practicing of husbandry techniques, or the disruption or interference of animals in their natural environment, or removal from their environment and so forth like that. So any interaction like that, whether it's for research or education, and I know everyone today is here for the research element of it, but if it's for either component or either element, it does require formal ethical review before engaging with the animal. And that list there, I think I have 6 bullet points there. That's not exhaustive, and I'd always be cautious that when we're putting together lists that they're not seen to be exhaustive. That's why I put in, but are not limited to really kind of capture that. Okay, so this is just setting the scene to kind of get people thinking to what kind of engagement there is with animals. Just to let you know then, so we have 5 formal documents that have been approved by the Academic Council. They were approved on the 30th of May, and these documents would have been put together by the Animal Research Ethics Working Group, would have been channeled through the Research and Innovation Committee, would have got feedback from the animal welfare body as well. So and these, I know, ideally it would be great if we could share some links with you in the chat to these documents. They will be publishable. It's just basically working around the academic time council and their own workload at the moment, but hopefully they'll be available and we can disseminate them later. Not this week, realistically, would probably be next week. Okay, but just to let you know that we have animal ethics documents, formal animal ethics documents in the university. So we have a policy. I won't call out the full name. We have a terms of reference for our Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee. And I'm delighted actually here that we're actually joined in this information session by the chair of our Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee, Dr. Garode Sears. So thanks very much, Garode, for joining. We have a screening checklist to help our researchers to decide as a guidance to what application form they would be using. Would it be a minimal risk or would it be a full ethical review? Then we have the minimal risk application form and a full ethical review application form. So as you can appreciate, there's a lot of documentation there. The purpose of today is not to go through all of that. It's maybe just kind of give an overview and to maybe do a small bit of signposting as well and mention a couple of the main points to it. And obviously this can't be exhaustive, but we're very much welcome any questions that attendees may have as well. So the red box around this is just to let you know that these documents have been formally approved by the Academic Council and they will be coming to implementation on the 1st of September of this calendar year, so in 2025. There is a 6th document that will be left as an information document, not so much of maybe interest to this group because we're focusing on research, but still will say it's more of an FYI that there will be a protocol document for the engagement with animals for educational purposes that we'll be working with as well. And that's going to be kind of a living document for the first academic year, so for the first term of its use. And all these documents will be available on the Animal Research Ethics webpage that we have, and Sinead is going to pop the link to that into the chat as well. So that's a webpage that will be updated over the summer as well, with the various documents and with various resources that we have planned as well. So maybe just to kind of say the principles of animal ethics that underpin all those 5 documents that we mentioned there earlier. And it very much would focus on that when we engage with animals, whether it's for teaching or for research purposes, it's where there's no appropriate alternative available, where the minimum number of animals are used, where it's the minimum necessary pain, suffering, or distress is caused, and where there's the appropriate welfare provisions are in place. And these will be underpinned then by the 3 R's as principles. I won't read them all out, but these are legislative principles that we have in terms of replacement, reduction, and refinement. And when it comes to the policies and the various documents that I mentioned there earlier, we have all these kind of, I suppose, the text that you see here, and we have them, there's references to all this. So this is not, and this is something we were very careful with when we were putting together the documents. This is not just MTU kind of I suppose reinventing the wheel to a certain case and kind of saying, look, this is how we're going to be conducting our research. This is aligning with what's seen as national and international good practice as well. And we reference all those various documents at appropriate places in our own formal documents as well. Along with the 3 R's as principles, we also look at the principles of where there's that benefit and harm kind of balance, where there's the competence of the actual researcher that's engaging with the research. There is the appropriate data management and collection in place. There's an appropriate duty of care. And then there's openness as well, openness around the procedures that are being used. Sorry, I should be careful with the word procedure, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the appropriate openness around the methods that are actually being used, and about dissemination of outputs as well afterwards. When it comes to, so the policy would be our obviously main overarching document that we have, and the policy covers, there's a lot in it. I don't say that in the negative. It's obviously a very important topic, so it was appropriate that there will be a lot in it. My reason for saying a lot is that I'm just going to maybe I think I've like 8 to 10 bullet points that I'm taking from that policy to draw attendees' attention to it as well. And I suppose it's just also to state that we have another committee. So this, when it comes to the animal ethics, it is going to be overseen by the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee in parallel then with the animal welfare body. But with the ethics committee in particular, that's the main one we're focusing on for today's session, this information session. We have a human research ethics committee as well in the university. And what we're aiming for, what we're trying to do anyway, is that there is going to be a certain level of consistency as much as possible with how both committees operate. So that if we have researchers that are engaging with the human research, that if they're engaging with animal research, that their experience in terms of the application forms, in terms of guidelines, in terms of general supports are consistent. That it's not a case of, oh, well, one is using a totally different approach to the other. Now, obviously, it's different in the case of it's humans and animals, but I suppose the method that we use or the processes that we use will be some way consistent, and hopefully that will help with the overall research experience as well. But so a couple of points to mention that is, and this would be consistent with the human side as well, is that when you're submitting a research ethics and education, a research and education ethics application form, that you need to show appropriate evidence of training as well. And I'll speak to examples of that now in a couple of minutes. I've already mentioned the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee, so they're who facilitate the ethical review of all use of animals, and that's also for research and for educational purposes. When it comes to an application form, which would be your minimal risk or your full ethical review, mainly for the cohort in this room here, it is for the PI to sign off on that. So if we have any students in the room, the students by all means can complete the ethics application form, but it's their supervisor then that would be signing off on it and would be submitting the ethics application form. It is important that before an application form is submitted to the committee, that the appropriate design and oversight has been taken place. So it's not a case of that any application can be just slapped together and put into the ethics committee, kind of like maybe putting a car into the NCT, it would be a case of that there has to be the appropriate design put in place first. And if an application isn't actually fit for purpose when it's been submitted to the ethics committee, it will actually be returned. Okay, so it's important that it is the appropriate thought and consideration has gone into these application forms. It is only natural, and because at the end of the day, if we're doing research, things do change. Okay, so that you may submit an ethics application form, it will get approved, and maybe in a couple of months' time, some aspect of the application form, some aspect to the research study may change, and that change has ethical implications. That is completely understandable, and it's just that you know that if a study does change, it is important then that you go back, and it is required, I suppose, that you go back to the ethics committee and inform all of that. And we have an amendment form, an ethics application amendment form for that, and that is up on the webpage as well. That Sinead popped into the chat. When you have completed your study, so the animal research study that you're engaging with, there's an end of study report form that would be needed to be submitted. The various, and look, these points, they're all related, but I mean, these are the kind of some thoughts that I had when I was preparing the slide deck here. It's just, I suppose, when you are engaging with animals, and if it's for maybe collaborating with an external researcher, or the policy still holds, or policy still holds. So, I mean, if it's a case of that you're engaging with an external researcher, and maybe they're the lead researcher on it, and they're conducting their research in a way that is not aligned with our policy, that's something that you need to flag. Okay, so the policy is when you are engaging with animal research to things that you should be aligning with. Okay, and if speaking to the external collaborator, it would typically be the case of that if you're collaborating with external researchers, if the external researcher is the PI, so is the main investigator for this study, that the ethics approval would come from their institution. It would not come from our institution, would not come from MTU. While if you are the PI, the ethics approval needs to come from MTU. Okay, so if you're engaging with other external bodies in some collaborative study that involves animals and you are the lead PI to it, then the ethics approval needs to come from MTU. Okay, and at the end of the day, the university as an MTU does reserve the right to overrule a decision of another ethics committee if it believes that it's needed, and obviously if it involves researchers from the university as well. I've mentioned the animal welfare body, and look, this information session isn't for about the animal welfare body, but it is important to speak to. There's a relationship there between the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee and the animal welfare body, where they will be working together when it comes to the animal research. But maybe just to give a small bit of information about the animal welfare body, if anyone in the room is not familiar, it's an internal statutory body, and I will read this out because I suppose this is kind of the fact that it's a statutory body. It's important to kind of get the description right here. It's that is charged with protecting the welfare of animals used for research and education, and it does link in with the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee. It will be looking at the overseeing and enforcing the protection of live animals that are being used for research purposes and educational purposes. But obviously, we're here for the research side. So if you want to look at it, you can think of it that the ethics committee is where you go for initially to kind of get your ethical oversight to actually conducting the research. The animal welfare body then will oversee it then as it's actually being conducted. If you change your study and it has ethical implications, you would notify the animal welfare body and you would go back to the ethics committee then also on that as well. So they will be working together, but I suppose the animal welfare body will be overseeing the research as it actually is being conducted and will be engaging with the researcher on that as well. So I've kind of touched on that already and touched on this bit as well as where they'll be working together. When it comes to the procedure of how we're going to review application forms, so I mentioned on an earlier slide that we'll have 2 application forms, a minimal risk and a full ethical review. So how this actually works when it comes to kind of a review procedure or a review process, I actually should change the title to that slide deck. It shouldn't actually say procedure, only because the word procedure has actual meaning in animal ethics, and I'll touch on that now in a slide or two. But the researcher would link in with the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee to let them know that they're going to be engaging with animals, or this could be an educator as well. So the first question is, look, will it be for research or will it be for educational purposes? If it's for research, which obviously is where we are, the purpose of this session, then it's a case of there's a screening checklist, which is a guideline document, and I'll share a screen grab of that now in a couple of minutes. And that guideline document will give guidance to what type of application form may be most appropriate, whether it be a full ethical review or whether it would be a minimal risk. Okay, and like there can be a case of where the guideline document can be very clear and it can be very clear cut to what type of application form you may require. Equally, it could be a case of that when you're submitting, I suppose, reviewing this checklist, you might kind of feel, look, I'm a bit in the gray area here. It is mentioned in the screening checklist, like if you are unsure, that you reach out to the ethics committee and they will help support that. If you're going down the route of education, and I know everyone here is for the research side, but it's no harm to let you just be some way aware of what's happening at the other side. If you're looking at engaging with animals for education purposes, well, then what is kind of that educational activity? It could be for maybe a dissertation for a taught program, like maybe a final year project or a taught master's. Now we have these, we're going to be rolling out these approved protocols, but maybe while they're being rolled out or being put together, there may be a case of, look, that engagement with animals for kind of a form of a dissertation would be seen, would be fed into through the minimal risk. While if you're looking at engaging with animals for teaching purposes in terms of programs, modules, and hopefully in time dissertations as well, we'll be looking at following an approved protocol for that. So, and I won't go into that in any more detail. That will be for tomorrow's information session. And obviously what we're here is for the research side here. So maybe just to mention, look, because I mentioned there minimal risk a few times, like what is minimal risk? And so I put up together a couple of points here. These are all taken from the various documents that I've highlighted earlier. So this is not new content here. And again, I'm very much aware that these are very text heavy slides, but obviously it's quite important that there's no ambiguity to where things actually sit in terms of animal ethics in the university. So if you're looking at engaging with animals and it does not require HIPAA licensing, so HIPAA is the Health Products Regulatory Authority, then that would be a signpost that it would be minimal risk. Okay, so that HIPAA will be that regulatory agency. Now I say may, and I purposely use the word may because there can be instances of where you may be engaging with animals that does not require HIPAA licensing, but it still would be a full ethical review. But so that's why there's a may. But typically, if you don't require HIPAA licensing, it is kind of a sign that you're moving into the minimal risk category, typically. But there are a couple of exceptions to that. So if you're, and obviously with the HIPAA licensing, that would mean then that you're looking at some engagement that does not apply to scientific animal protection legislation. And that's important. There is legislation there, and that's why what we've set up here in the university is a very important body of work. And that's why when we say earlier about the animal welfare body being a statutory body, is because there is legislation there around the engagement with animals for research and education purposes. But just give some examples of maybe the minimal risk side of it again, but not limited to. So this is not exhaustive, but would be taken from the formal documentation that we'd have in the university, which is aligning with national and international practices as well. So if you're engaging with animals for non-experimental agriculture purposes or practices, clinical veterinary practices, so non-experimental clinical veterinary practices. You're looking at veterinary clinical trials that are required for marketing authorization. You're looking at practices that will be essentially fall under the heading of animal husbandry. You're looking for, or maybe you could be engaging with practices for the primary purposes of identification of an animal. Equally, practices that will not cause pain, suffering, or distress or lasting harm. So there will be typical kind of engagements with animals for research purposes that would fall under that heading of minimal risk. I have mentioned procedure, and I have mentioned, look, how that is a kind of a loaded term, or nearly a kind of a protected word in animal research, and rightly so. So it's important then that we put together a slide just on that. So when it comes to an animal procedure, and I actually will read this out because this is part of legislation and it's important that you get this right. So any use, invasive or non-invasive, of an animal for experimental or scientific purposes with known or unknown outcome or educational purposes, which may cause the animal a level of pain, suffering, distress, or lasting harm equivalent to or higher than caused by the introduction of a needle in accordance with good veterinary practice. Okay, so there's a lot there to that, but it's obviously important to get it quite clear. So if we're engaging with an animal that would fall under this bracket, this would be classified as a procedure. And if it's classified as a procedure, then that would mean in the university, it would be require full ethical review, but that's not where it would stop. Like in the university, if you get approval through the full ethical review process, then the ethics committee would notify the animal welfare body, and then there will be an application put to the regulatory agency, HIPAA, for that authorization. if there was going to be engagement with animals for research purposes, that would fall under this bracket of an animal procedure. There's another part to this then as well. So this includes any course of action intended or liable to result in the birth or hatching of an animal, or the creation and maintenance of a genetically modified animal line in any such condition, but excludes the killing of animals solely for the use of their organs or tissues. So a lot mentioned there again, but this kind of just further explains, look, what is actually covered by an animal procedure. And this would clearly be something that would require full ethical review. And in our ethics application form, we actually call out that if you're engaging with an animal procedure, then you're also going to have to look at completing an HIPAA application form as well. And that would need to be submitted with the full ethical review application form that you'd be going to the ARIC with as well. Okay. And that's called out in the actual application form. But equally then, we fully appreciate that a lot of this document, even the content that maybe I'm saying here, will be new to some people in the room. Like the ARIC are there to support in this as well. Okay. I mentioned there earlier about minimal risk and full ethical review, and I would have mentioned about a screening checklist. So we have a screening checklist, which is a guideline document to kind of help researchers, so that when maybe before that they reach out to the ARIC to look what type of ethics application form that would I need to complete, that they'd actually review this screening checklist first. And essentially what we tried to do here, and again, it's a guideline document, so there can always be a bit of grayness in certain areas, but hopefully this is some way helpful for the researchers as well. So if it's yes to any of these, then you would expect that it will be a full ethical review application form. If it's no to all of them, then you would expect that it will be minimal risk. And you can see there, the word may is used there for that second one, okay? Because there can be these exceptions to it as well. So it's very possible that you may complete at minimal risk, and in the review process, a reviewer or the ethics committee would kind of say, look, that this is beyond minimal risk, and you might have to go do a full ethical review form. That's why we'd always say, if you're unsure, and this will be the same for the human side as well, if you're unsure, reach out to the ethics committee and they try to give you a bit of a signposting towards it as well. You can see here on this slide, there's 15 points that we have from the screening checklist to kind of give some guidance towards whether something is full ethical review or minimal risk. I won't mention them all. I mean, you're able to read them yourselves, but just kind of flag a couple there. So if there's changes to the diet of the animal, which may cause pain, hunger, or discomfort, that would be full ethical review. And just to mention one more, if you're looking to taking the animal from its mother or its kin in early life, that would be something that would have full ethical review, would require full ethical review as well. I didn't pick those two because they're the most prevalent that we have in the university or anything like that. I just picked them to kind of, just to kind of give examples of, look, this actual screening checklist. Okay. And then just one other aspect to the screening checklist, and this would be where signposting to a minimal risk application form is if you're engaging with animals that may have ethical approval somewhere else. This will be typically now where you're not the PI for an actual study. So you're engaging with an external collaborator, they're the PI, they've got the ethical approval, and you're letting the university know that this is actually happening. That would fall under this kind of minimal risk bracket. Okay. And essentially both those, that's what the first number 16 there speaks to what I just said there about the external collaborator. And number 17 speaks to, look, where you're not causing any pain or distress to the animal greater than would be encountered during normal lives. Okay. Okay, so when it comes to the application form, and again, I'm not going to go through the whole application form. I'm not sharing the application form here, but this is maybe just to mention a couple of bits and pieces to it. As part of the application process, you will need to be looking at a data protection impact assessment. So that we have a screening checklist in the university that would need to be submitted along with your application form. If it's yes to all those options, then you're okay. You're okay to progress. But if it's a case of, if it's no to all the options, I was thinking of the screening checklist in the opposite way. If it's no to all the questions in the screening checklist, and this is the data protection impact assessment screening checklist, so that's a different one to the one I've just mentioned previous. This is all around data protection. If it's no to all of those, then the screening checklist is enough to submit to the ethics application form along with your ethics application. If it's yes to any of them, then that's where you need to go to get a data protection impact assessment done. And that's not done by the ethics committee. That will be a separate operation that's done by the data protection officer. And that's something that you need to be allowing time for. And your ethics application form cannot be submitted until you actually have your DPIA done. Okay. Now, I would imagine that the majority of research studies that involve animals when you complete the screening checklist, it won't need a DPIA, but there will be some. It will be a minority, and for those minority, if you require a DPIA, it needs to be done before it goes to the ethics committee. There's certification of training for research ethics. Okay, and I'll have a screenshot of that now in a couple of minutes as well. I've already mentioned it also. If you are like a lot of the time, when it comes to, so I won't say a lot of the time, but there can be instances of when you're engaging with animals that you may need approval from an animal owner to actually engage with an animal on a particular site. Well, if you're engaging with an animal owner, like part of that process is you're going to be providing that animal owner with an information sheet and a consent form in order for you to progress to actually engage with the animal. Well, as part of the application process, that information sheet and consent form needs to be included as well. Okay, so this is where you're clearly outlining to the animal owner what's involved in the research, like what's the benefit, what are the risks, what's going to happen to data, and so on like that as well. Okay, if you find that, and this is going to be very possible as well, and will be the case, that you're engaging with animals, but you'll also be engaging with humans. Like maybe as an example, like you're looking at access to animals on a site. Okay, so we'll say a farmer is giving you access to their animals. Then that's fine. And all you're asking for is consent to get access to the farm animals. Then that is your typical animal research and education ethics application form. Okay. But then when you're linking in with this farmer or farmers, if you ask them maybe to complete a survey about something, about farm life or about their perceptions of something, well, then that's where you're engaging with the farmer for research purposes. And so that would be the human side, okay? And if you're conducting research that has those two sides to it, well, then that's where you would actually need ethical approval from your Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee and your Human Research Ethics Committee. So that will be the two avenues that you need to go down. We will give you a couple more examples of them up on the webpage over the summer. Again, over the summer, we'll be updating the webpage. So, and we'll launch that on the 1st of September also. But we'll give a couple of examples of where this fourth bullet point could fall into place as well. Okay. When it comes to the animal ethics training, and I don't have many more slides here now. So when it comes to the animal ethics training, there's multiple facets to doing this, ways of doing this. What I'd imagine the one that is most convenient for the researchers would be through the EpiGM research integrity platform that we have. So when you do research integrity training, EpiGM is the one that is it is recognized by all our funding agencies. There are core modules as part of the research integrity platform, so the EpiGM platform. But underneath that, then there's these specialist modules. So if you log into your EpiGM, up at the top you have these core modules, and then underneath you have these specialist modules. Okay, and so these specialist modules are essentially standalone additional modules. There's one around conflict of interest. There's one around engagement with humans for research purposes. There's one around the care and use of animals in research. So I would imagine that, and the engagement, this one will be kind of 1 hour of training. When you engage with it, you have a 10-question multiple choice test to do at the end, 8 questions to be correct, and then you get your certificate. You can download that certificate, and then that's included with your ethics application form. Okay, I'd imagine most people in the room will be familiar with EpiGM at this point. So there is that EpiGM additional module that you can look at, and then that will satisfy the requirement to have ethics training when you're submitting an application form here in the university. Equally, that's only one aspect, and I suppose that's the one that's potentially most accessible to people. But equally, we could have researchers in the room that may have done other types of research ethics training or animal research ethics training. Sorry, not, and that would be important that the training would be in relation to animals. And that will be looked at in a case-by-case basis. But if somebody did some training external, we are very happy to recognize that, as long as there's kind of a certificate and maybe a breakdown to what's covered in the training. Absolutely, we'll definitely accept that. The last thing then, I'm just going to stop here then with this one, is just to kind of share the submission dates for applications for the next academic year. These will go up on the webpage. They will go up over the summer. So when you come back in the next academic year, these will be available. But it maybe some people in the room may like to know already. So the deadlines for submitting application forms is typically the second week of most months. Now there's a couple of exceptions around Christmas, Easter, and so on like that. But typically you're looking at kind of that second or third week of a month. and they're the dates. I won't call them all out there. I'm happy for you to take a screen grab. We'll be sharing these slides. Like this session here has been recorded. It's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel and our institutional repository, SWORD. When we upload the recording to SWORD, we'll actually include the slide deck as well, and we'll send out an email afterwards, kind of letting everyone know about this as well. Okay. And just the last thing there, again, we've mentioned the webpage a few times. So here's the webpage, and then here is the new email address. So the email address for our Animal Research Education and Ethics Committee. Okay.